Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the golden sands of ancient Nubia, where love was a game played with kohl-rimmed eyes, precious metals, and enough romantic drama to make modern dating apps look like child's play. Picture this. You're walking through the bustling streets of Mara around 300 BCE, and everywhere you look, there's flirtation happening in ways that would probably make your grandmother blush and your dating coach take notes. You think swiping right is complicated. Try navigating romance when a single glance could mean marriage negotiations involving 3 kingdoms, 2 dowries, and a herd of cattle. You probably won't survive the intensity of ancient Nubian courtship without developing serious trust issues about your own modern dating skills. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time you're listening. I love seeing where in the world you're joining me for these midnight history sessions. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the shadow of a sandstone temple, watching as a young Nubian woman applies fresh kohl around her eyes with the precision of a master artist. This isn't just makeup, it's warfare. In ancient Nubia, beauty standards were so specific and ritualized that getting ready for a potential romantic encounter was like preparing for battle. Except the weapons were antimony powder, gold bangles, and strategically placed henna tattoos. The kohl she's applying isn't just about looking good, though trust me, those dramatically outlined eyes could stop traffic on the Nile. This black powder, made from galena and stibnite, was believed to protect against the evil eye and enhance one's spiritual power. Historians still argue whether the elaborate eye makeup was primarily cosmetic, medicinal, or magical. But one thing's certain. It was absolutely essential for anyone serious about romance. You watch as she layers on jewelry with the dedication of someone building a shrine. Gold wasn't just precious in Nubia, it was practically a love language. The kingdom controlled some of the richest gold mines in the ancient world, and wearing it wasn't just about showing wealth. Each piece told a story. Twisted gold bracelets indicated family lineage. Specific earring styles revealed regional origins, and the way someone wore their collar necklaces could signal their availability for courtship. But here's where it gets really interesting, and slightly ridiculous by modern standards. Nubian beauty ideals included having perfectly straight, white teeth, which led to some creative dental work. People would file their teeth into precise points or geometric patterns, then polish them with a mixture of crushed ostrich eggshells and aromatic herbs. Imagine explaining that to your dentist today. The woman you're observing suddenly stands, and you notice something that would make any modern fashion influencer weep with envy. Her skin has been oiled with a mixture that includes myrrh, frankincense, and what ancient texts describe as the fat of the hippopotamus. This wasn't just moisturizer. It was a complex perfume that could be detected from across a crowded marketplace, essentially serving as ancient Nubian cologne. Hair was another battlefield entirely. Both men and women spent hours creating elaborate braided styles that incorporated gold threads, ivory beads, and sometimes even small bells that would chime softly as they walked. The sound was considered deeply attractive. Imagine having a personal soundtrack that announced your romantic availability wherever you went. You notice her checking her reflection in a polished bronze mirror, adjusting a small leather pouch hanging from her belt. Inside that pouch, probably a mixture of ground pearls, powdered gold, and aromatic resins that she'll apply to her pulse points throughout the day. This was the ancient equivalent of touch-up makeup, except it cost more than most people's annual income. The really fascinating part is how these beauty rituals varied by social class and region. A merchant's daughter from Mera might favor elaborate gold nose rings and intricate scarification patterns, while a farmer's daughter from the outer provinces might focus on natural dyes that stained her lips and fingernails in shades of red and orange that could be seen from remarkable distances. What strikes you most is the confidence. This isn't insecurity masked by makeup. This is war paint applied by someone who knows exactly what they're doing and exactly what effect they want to achieve. Every brushstroke of kohl, every carefully placed bead, every drop of perfumed oil is a calculated move in a romantic chess game that's been refined over centuries. You find yourself in the royal palace of Mera, where the air practically vibrates with political tension and romantic intrigue. The Candake, that's queen to you, sits on her throne carved from black granite, and she's not just ruling a kingdom. She's about to choose her next consort through a process that makes reality TV dating shows look like amateur hour. The current Candake, let's call her Ammonirnas, because that's actually her name, and she was absolutely terrifying, has just announced that she's accepting suitors. But here's the twist that would make modern dating coaches quit their jobs. She's not looking for love letters or dinner dates. She wants poetry battles, gift competitions, and public displays of worthiness that could literally bankrupt a man's entire family. You watch as the first suitor approaches, carrying what appears to be half of Egypt's treasury. We're talking gold ingots, ivory tusks, bolts of Chinese silk, and a live leopard on a jeweled leash. This isn't a romantic gesture. It's an economic statement. In Nubian royal courtship, your opening move needed to demonstrate that you could contribute to the kingdom's wealth, not just drain it through expensive dates. But wait, it gets better. The suitor doesn't just present his gifts and hope for the best. He has to perform an original poem praising the queen's military victories, her divine connection to the goddess Isis, and her ability to make the Nile flood at exactly the right time for optimal crop yields. Historians still argue whether these poems were actually romantic or just elaborate job applications. But the pressure was real enough to make grown men faint. The queen listens with the expression of someone who's heard this exact same routine 47 times this month. Because here's what the history books don't always mention. Candakes were incredibly picky. They had absolute power, controlled vast wealth, and could literally have any man in the known world. Why would they settle for someone who couldn't even rhyme beautiful with dutiful without sweating through his finest linen? You notice something fascinating happening in the background. While the main suitor is performing his heart out, other potential consorts are networking with the queen's advisors, her military commanders, and even her personal servants. This isn't just about impressing the queen. It's about building a coalition of support that could influence her decision. Ancient Nubian royal romance was basically medieval politics with better jewelry. The second suitor steps forward, and this guy has clearly done his research. Instead of more gold, because honestly, how much gold does one person need? He presents the queen with a collection of rare books from the Library of Alexandria, a team of Greek mathematicians who can improve her tax collection system. And this is where it gets weird. A recipe for a new type of beer that supposedly enhances fertility. The queen actually perks up at this. Not because of the fertility beer, though that's intriguing, but because this suitor understands something crucial about Candake culture. These women valued intellectual stimulation as much as physical attraction. A man who could discuss military strategy, trade routes, and agricultural innovation while looking good in a gold collar. That was the ancient Nubian equivalent of finding someone who's hot, funny, and financially stable. But here's where the process gets really intense. The queen announces that all serious suitors must participate in a series of challenges over the next month. We're talking chariot races, archery competitions, public debates about foreign policy, and something called the test of the sacred crocodiles that nobody wants to explain in detail. You watch as several suitors immediately excuse themselves and head for the nearest exit. Smart move, honestly. The ones who stay are either incredibly brave, incredibly stupid, or incredibly confident in their crocodile handling abilities. The third suitor, clearly the crowd favorite, approaches with a different strategy entirely. No massive gifts, no elaborate poems, no exotic animals. Instead, he presents the queen with a small, intricately carved ivory box. Inside, a single black pearl from the Red Sea, accompanied by a simple message. For the woman who already has everything except someone who sees her as she truly is. The entire throne room goes silent. This is either the most romantic gesture in Nubian history, or the most spectacular failure anyone's ever witnessed. The queen examines the pearl for what feels like an eternity, then looks directly at the suitor with an expression that could either melt hearts or stop them entirely. What happens next will determine whether this man becomes the next royal consort, or becomes a cautionary tale told to future generations of overly confident suitors. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a ceremonial dagger, and everyone in the room knows they're witnessing. You're weaving through the chaotic marketplace of Maria at midday, where the air shimmers with heat and possibility. This isn't just commerce happening around you. It's an elaborate theater of romance, where every transaction might lead to a marriage proposal, and every haggling session could spark a love affair that reshapes two families' destinies. The spice merchant's stall catches your attention first, not because of the pyramids of cinnamon and cardamom, but because of the intricate dance happening between the merchant and a young woman examining his wares. She's not just shopping for spices. She's participating in an ancient Nubian courtship ritual that's more complex than modern speed dating and infinitely more fragrant. Watch how she picks up a handful of black pepper, letting the corns roll through her fingers while maintaining eye contact with the merchant. This isn't accident, it's a calculated move. In Nubian market culture, the way someone handled spices communicated their intentions. Rolling pepper through your fingers meant you were open to conversation. Crushing cardamom pods indicated serious romantic interest. And if someone started grinding cinnamon bark, well, that was basically the ancient equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs. The merchant responds by offering her a taste of honey from his personal collection, not the regular stuff he sells to tourists. This honey comes from bees that feed exclusively on acacia flowers during the brief rainy season. And it's so rare that most people only taste it at wedding ceremonies. By offering it freely, he's essentially saying, I think you're worth my most precious possession, and I'm willing to risk everything on the chance that you might feel the same way. You notice how other customers are pretending to shop, while actually watching this interaction unfold. Market romance was public entertainment in ancient Nubia, and everyone had opinions about who belonged with whom. The elderly woman selling pottery is clearly rooting for this match. She keeps nodding approvingly and muttering what sound like blessings under her breath. But here's where it gets really interesting. The young woman suddenly shifts her attention to the silk merchant's stall next door, running her fingers along a bolt of fabric imported from distant China. This isn't rejection. It's escalation. She's testing whether the spice merchant values her enough to follow her lead and potentially spend serious money proving his devotion. The spice merchant doesn't hesitate. He abandons his stall, trusting his younger brother to handle sales, and approaches the silk merchant with the confidence of someone who's about to make a purchase that will either secure his romantic future or bankrupt his family's business for the next 3 generations. Historians still argue whether these market courtship rituals were spontaneous expressions of attraction or carefully choreographed performances designed to maximize social and economic advantage. But watching it unfold, you realize it's probably both. The emotions are real, but so are the calculations. The silk merchant, recognizing an opportunity for profit and entertainment, begins unrolling his finest fabrics with the flair of someone performing for an audience. Each bolt tells a story. Deep blue silk dyed with indigo from the southern provinces, golden yellow fabric that shimmers like sunlight on the Nile, and a remarkable red silk that's supposedly colored with crushed pearls and costs more than most people earn in a year. The young woman examines each fabric with the intensity of someone making a life-changing decision, because that's exactly what she's doing. The color and quality of silk a suitor could afford revealed everything about his family's wealth, his business connections, and his long-term prospects as a provider. But then something unexpected happens. Instead of choosing the most expensive fabric, she selects a simple white silk with subtle silver threading, beautiful but not ostentatious. The spice merchant looks confused until she explains her choice in a voice loud enough for half the marketplace to hear. A wise woman chooses a man who values her judgment over his own pride. The crowd that's gathered around this impromptu romance erupts in appreciative murmurs. This woman has just demonstrated that she's not interested in being bought. She wants a partner who respects her intelligence and trusts her decisions. The spice merchant's face transforms from confusion to admiration to something that looks suspiciously like love at first sight. He purchases the silk without haggling, a major romantic gesture in a culture where bargaining is considered both art and sport. Then does something that makes the entire marketplace gasp. He asks her to help him choose spices for his own family's dinner that evening. This is essentially a marriage proposal disguised as a shopping request. The young woman considers his invitation while the entire marketplace holds its breath. Her answer will determine whether this becomes a story their grandchildren tell about how their grandparents met, or a cautionary tale about the day you're standing in the shadow of the Temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal, where the air thrums with religious fervor and barely concealed romantic tension. This isn't your typical place of worship. It's ancient Nubia's premier matchmaking venue, where young people gather under the pretense of honoring the gods while actually sizing each other up as potential life partners. The festival of the Nile's rising has begun, and you're witnessing something that would make modern dating apps obsolete. A 3-day religious celebration where finding divine favor and finding a spouse are considered equally important spiritual pursuits. The priests have blessed this as a time when the gods smile upon new unions, which basically gives everyone permission to flirt with religious justification. You watch as a young man approaches the altar carrying an offering of frankincense and myrrh, but his eyes aren't on the sacred flame. They're tracking a young woman who's performing ritual dances with a group of temple maidens. This is strategic positioning at its finest. By making offerings at the same time she's dancing, he's demonstrating his devotion to the gods while ensuring she notices his generosity and spiritual commitment. The dance she's performing isn't just religious expression. It's an elaborate display of grace, stamina, and cultural knowledge that serves as a kind of ancient resume. Each movement tells potential suitors about her family's status, her education level, and her physical health. The way she spins reveals her balance and coordination. The complexity of her steps demonstrates her memory and learning ability. And the fact that she can maintain perfect rhythm for hours without breaking a sweat, that's advertising her potential as a hardworking wife and mother. But here's where ancient Nubian temple romance gets really sophisticated. The young man can't just walk up and introduce himself. That would be socially catastrophic and possibly blasphemous. Instead, he has to communicate his interest through a complex system of religious gestures that double as romantic signals. He begins by lighting incense at the altar dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love and beauty. This sends a clear message. He's seeking divine assistance in matters of the heart. Then he places a small gold amulet among his offerings. Not just any amulet, but one shaped like a lotus flower, which symbolizes rebirth and new beginnings. Every unmarried woman in the temple understands exactly what he's communicating. The young woman responds by adjusting her dance to include movements that honor Hathor specifically, essentially accepting his invitation to a religiously sanctioned flirtation. The other dancers notice and begin incorporating supportive gestures that encourage the match. Because temple romance was a community affair where everyone had opinions, and most people had ulterior motives. You notice the temple priests watching this interaction with expressions of benevolent amusement. They're not just tolerating this romantic theater, they're actively facilitating it. Historians still argue whether this was genuine spiritual guidance or clever social engineering, designed to strengthen community bonds. But the priests clearly understood that happy marriages meant stable families, which meant consistent temple donations. The festival reaches its peak as the sun sets, and the real matchmaking begins. Families start approaching each other with the kind of casual confidence that comes from 3 days of careful observation and strategic positioning. The young man's parents have been watching the dancer's family, noting their offerings, their clothing quality, and their interactions with other temple members. Meanwhile, her parents have been evaluating his family's wealth, social connections, and religious devotion. But then something magical happens that transcends all the social calculation and family politics. During the evening's final ceremony, as the priests chant prayers for the Nile's continued blessing, the young man and woman find themselves standing side by side at the altar. Their hands brush as they both reach to place offerings in the sacred flame, and for a moment, all the strategic positioning and careful planning falls away. They look at each other in the flickering firelight, and you can see something genuine spark between them. Not just attraction or social compatibility, but recognition. The kind of connection that makes people believe in fate and divine intervention, and all the romantic nonsense that keeps temples in business and hearts breaking across centuries. The priests notice this moment too, and the eldest among them steps forward to offer a blessing that's clearly improvised, but sounds like it's been planned for months. May Amen grant you wisdom in your choices. May Hathor bless your union with joy, and may the Nile's rising bring abundance to your shared future. This isn't just a religious blessing. It's an official endorsement of their match by the temple's spiritual authority. In ancient Nubian society, this carries more weight than parental approval, social compatibility, or even personal preference. When the gods approve your relationship through their earthly representatives, you don't argue with divine wisdom. The crowd of worshippers erupts in celebration, because everyone loves a good temple romance with divine approval. What happens next will determine whether this becomes a legendary love story blessed by the gods, or you're reclining on cushions in a torchlit courtyard where the evening air carries the hypnotic rhythm of Nubian lyres and the soft whisper of bare feet on stone. This isn't just entertainment. It's seduction choreographed to ancient melodies that have been making hearts race and inhibitions disappear for over 2,000 years. The musicians begin with a haunting melody played on the arden, a five-stringed harp that produces sounds so ethereal they seem to bypass your ears and speak directly to your soul. But you quickly realize this isn't background music. It's the opening movement of an elaborate romantic symphony, where every note is calculated to create the perfect atmosphere for intimate connections. A young woman steps into the circle of torchlight, and her first movement tells you everything about Nubian dance as romantic expression. This isn't the rigid, formal dancing you might expect from ancient cultures. Her body moves like water, like wind, like everything fluid and natural in the world, and every gesture seems designed to demonstrate grace, strength, and an almost supernatural connection to the rhythm. The dance she's performing is called the Dance of the River's Blessing, and it tells the story of the Nile's annual flood through movements that are simultaneously sacred and sensual. When she raises her arms to represent the rising waters, the gesture also showcases the elegant lines of her neck and shoulders. When she spins to show the river's swirling currents, her movements reveal the strength and flexibility that ancient Nubians considered essential qualities in a life partner. You notice how the men watching aren't just passive observers, they're participants in this romantic theater. The way they respond to her movements, the rhythm they clap, even where they choose to sit, all communicate their level of interest and their understanding of the cultural codes embedded in the performance. But here's where it gets really sophisticated. The musician playing the ardan begins incorporating subtle variations in the melody that correspond to the dancer's movements, essentially creating a musical conversation between them. When she moves closer to him, the music becomes more complex and intimate. When she spins away, the melody grows more plaintive and longing. They're flirting through their art, and everyone watching understands exactly what's happening. Historians still argue whether these musical courtship rituals were formal traditions or spontaneous expressions of attraction, but the evidence suggests they were probably both. The basic framework was traditional, but the specific interactions were improvised based on genuine chemistry and mutual interest. The evening's entertainment escalates when a second musician joins with a drum that sounds like a heartbeat amplified through the desert night. The rhythm is primal, insistent, and absolutely impossible to ignore. You feel it in your chest, in your bones, in places that remind you why music has been humanity's favorite aphrodisiac since someone first figured out how to make sounds that bypass rational thought entirely. The dancer responds to the drum beat by incorporating movements that are more grounded, more earthy, more explicitly sensual than the ethereal river dance. This is the dance of the desert's passion, and it's designed to showcase a completely different set of qualities: strength, endurance, and the kind of raw vitality that ancient Nubians believed essential for surviving the challenges of life in a harsh but beautiful land. Other women join the dance, creating a chorus of movement that transforms the courtyard into something between a religious ceremony and a very sophisticated singles mixer. Each dancer brings her own interpretation to the traditional steps, essentially advertising her personality, creativity, and individual charm to the assembled audience of potential suitors. The men respond by joining the musical ensemble, adding their voices in harmonies that weave around the instrumental melodies like audio silk. Nubian vocal music was renowned throughout the ancient world for its complexity and emotional power, and hearing it performed live in an intimate setting was considered one of life's great pleasures. But then something happens that elevates this from entertainment to genuine magic. The original dancer and musician lock eyes across the circle, and their performance becomes a duet that transcends the formal structure of the dances and songs. She moves to his music, he plays to her movements, and together they create something that's never existed before and will never exist again in exactly the same way. The audience recognizes this moment of artistic and romantic connection, and their responses become part of the performance. Soft exclamations of appreciation, gentle clapping that matches the rhythm, and the kind of collective holding of breath that happens when people witness something genuinely beautiful and spontaneous. You realize you're watching the ancient equivalent of two artists falling in love through their craft, surrounded by a community that understands and celebrates the connection between artistic expression and romantic attraction. This is courtship elevated to the level of high art, where technical skill, emotional authenticity, and physical attraction combine. You're sitting cross-legged on a reed mat in a scribe's workshop, watching as delicate fingers trace Meroitic characters across papyrus with the precision of someone whose heart depends on getting every symbol exactly right. This isn't just correspondence. It's ancient Nubia's version of long-distance romance, where love letters were works of art that could make or break relationships across vast desert distances. The young woman writing before you is crafting what might be the most important document of her life, a love letter to a merchant who's been traveling the trade routes between Meria and Alexandria for the past 6 months. But this isn't your typical "wish you were here" message. Nubian love letters were complex literary compositions that demonstrated education, wit, and emotional sophistication in ways that would make modern dating profiles look like grocery lists. She begins with the traditional opening. "To the one whose name makes my heart sing like the ibis at dawn," which sounds romantic until you realize it's also a coded reference to his family's wealth. The ibis was associated with Thoth, god of wisdom and prosperity, so she's essentially saying, "I love you and I'm impressed by your money," in the same breath. Ancient Nubian romance was nothing if not practical. The letter continues with what appears to be a simple description of daily life in Meria, but every detail carries deeper meaning. When she writes about the quality of this year's grain harvest, she's actually communicating information about her family's economic stability. Her mention of new jewelry from her father suggests a substantial dowry. Even her description of the weather patterns contains coded messages about the best times for his return journey. But here's where Nubian love letters get really sophisticated. Embedded within the practical information are layers of literary references that demonstrate her education and cultural knowledge. She quotes poetry from the royal court, references religious texts, and includes wordplay that works in both Meroitic and Egyptian hieroglyphs. This isn't just romantic correspondence. It's a comprehensive demonstration of her qualifications as an intellectual partner. You watch as she pauses to select a different reed pen for the next section, because the writing instrument itself carries meaning. The fine pen made from river reeds indicates delicate emotions and intimate thoughts. The broader pen cut from desert grass suggests strength and permanence. By switching between them, she's creating visual rhythm that mirrors the emotional content of her words. The middle section of the letter contains what historians call the longing passage, where she describes her emotional state using metaphors drawn from Nubian natural imagery. She compares her feelings to the Nile during flood season, powerful, overwhelming, and capable of transforming the landscape. Her loneliness is like the desert at midday, vast, intense, and impossible to ignore. These aren't just pretty words. They're culturally specific references that demonstrate her deep connection to Nubian identity and values. Historians still argue whether these elaborate metaphorical systems were genuine expressions of emotion or sophisticated literary conventions designed to showcase education and cultural refinement. But reading over her shoulder, you sense both elements working together. The emotions are real, but they're being expressed through highly refined artistic forms that add layers of meaning to every sentence. The letter takes an unexpected turn when she begins describing a dream she had about their future together. This isn't random romantic fantasy. Dream interpretation was serious business in ancient Nubia, and sharing dreams was considered a form of spiritual intimacy that went beyond physical attraction. In her dream, they're standing together at the confluence of the blue and white Niles, which symbolizes the joining of two separate lives into something larger and more powerful than either could achieve alone. But then she includes details that make the dream sequence function as practical planning disguised as romantic vision. The house she describes in the dream has specific architectural features that indicate her preferences for their future home. The children she envisions have characteristics that reveal her hopes for their families, social status, and educational opportunities. Even her dream is multitasking. The letter's conclusion demonstrates the most sophisticated aspect of Nubian romantic correspondence, the art of the meaningful postscript. After signing her name with flourishes that took years to perfect, she adds what appears to be a casual afterthought. The merchant Kimwasset sends his regards and mentioned that silk prices in Alexandria have dropped significantly. This isn't random gossip. It's crucial business intelligence that could affect her beloved's profit margins and travel plans. By including it almost casually at the letter's end, she's demonstrating that she pays attention to his professional interests and has access to valuable commercial information through her own social networks. She's essentially saying, "I love you, I support your career, and I can be a valuable business partner," all in one seemingly innocent sentence. You watch as she carefully rolls the papyrus and seals it with wax that's been mixed with frankincense, creating a distinctive scent that will remind him of her every time he opens the letter. The seal itself is pressed with a small carved stone that bears her family's symbol, not just identification, but a reminder of the social and economic alliance that their marriage would represent. The finished letter is a masterpiece of ancient communication technology. Part love note, part business correspondence, part literary composition, and part legal document establishing the terms of a potential relationship. It will travel hundreds of miles through desert and river routes, carrying not just words but hopes, dreams, and carefully calculated romantic strategy across the ancient world. You're seated in the reception hall of a prosperous Nubian household, where the air is thick with incense and tension, as two families engage in the delicate art of marriage negotiation. This isn't a simple, "will you marry my daughter" conversation. It's a complex diplomatic summit where every word carries the weight of economic alliance, social positioning, and political strategy that could affect multiple generations. The bride's father sits on a carved ebony chair that probably cost more than most people's houses, wearing enough gold to fund a small army. But his expression suggests he's not entirely convinced that the suitor's family brings sufficient value to justify parting with his most precious asset, a daughter whose marriage will determine his family's future prosperity and social standing for decades to come. The groom's family has arrived with what looks like a traveling merchant's entire inventory: ivory tusks from the southern provinces, bolts of silk from distant China, jars of precious spices, and a collection of cattle that's been grazing outside the compound for 3 days while negotiations proceed. This isn't just a dowry. It's an economic statement designed to demonstrate their ability to provide for the bride and contribute to her family's wealth. But here's where Nubian marriage negotiations get really sophisticated. The conversation isn't actually about the bride and groom at all. They're barely mentioned. Instead, the families are discussing trade routes, agricultural yields, political alliances, and military obligations that will bind their households together in ways that go far beyond romantic attachment. The bride's mother, who's been silent for the first hour, suddenly speaks up with a question that makes everyone in the room sit up straighter. What assurances can you provide regarding the Northern trade agreements? This isn't small talk. She's asking whether the groom's family has the political connections necessary to protect their combined commercial interests if regional conflicts disrupt normal business operations. The groom's father responds with information about his relationships with Egyptian merchants, Roman traders, and Aksumite diplomats that sounds more like a foreign policy briefing than a marriage discussion. He's essentially arguing that his son isn't just a husband. He's a gateway to international commercial opportunities that could transform both families' economic prospects. You notice the bride herself sitting quietly in the corner, observing everything with the intensity of someone whose entire future is being decided by people who keep referring to her as the Alliance, rather than using her actual name. But don't mistake her silence for passivity. Nubian women, especially from wealthy families, were expected to understand the political and economic implications of their marriages and to contribute intelligently to family strategy. Historians still argue whether these elaborate negotiations were primarily about economic advantage or genuine concern for the couple's compatibility and happiness. But watching the process unfold, you realize it's probably both. The families are making calculations that will affect everyone's prosperity, but they're also trying to create conditions where love and mutual respect can flourish. The discussion takes an interesting turn when the bride's uncle raises the question of children's inheritance rights. This gets complicated quickly, because Nubian inheritance laws were more flexible than many ancient cultures, allowing for various arrangements depending on family circumstances and political considerations. The negotiation suddenly becomes a complex legal discussion about property rights, succession planning, and the potential division of assets across multiple generations. But then something unexpected happens. The bride stands up and addresses both families with the confidence of someone who's been listening carefully and has reached her own conclusions. She doesn't challenge the economic arrangements. Those make sense and benefit everyone involved. Instead, she proposes modifications to the living arrangements that would allow her to maintain closer connections with her birth family, while still fulfilling her obligations to her husband's household. This intervention transforms the entire negotiation. Instead of two families making decisions about a passive participant, you're now watching three parties, bride, groom's family, and bride's family, working together to create arrangements that serve everyone's interests. The bride's suggestions demonstrate that she understands the political and economic implications of the marriage, while also asserting her own agency in determining how those arrangements will actually function. The groom's mother responds with obvious approval, because she recognizes that a daughter-in-law who can think strategically about family politics will be an asset rather than a burden. The bride's father looks proud, because his daughter has just demonstrated that her education and intelligence will continue to benefit his family, even after she marries into another household. The final negotiations focus on the wedding ceremony itself, which will be a public demonstration of both families' wealth, social connections, and political importance. The guest list becomes a strategic document that will signal alliances, acknowledge obligations, and potentially create new business opportunities. Even the menu requires diplomatic consideration, because the choice of foods and wines will communicate messages about the family's cultural sophistication and international connections. As the formal agreements are recorded by scribes whose services cost more than most people's annual income, you realize you've witnessed something remarkable. A marriage negotiation that successfully balances economic necessity, political strategy, family honor, and individual agency in ways that create genuine opportunities for happiness and prosperity. The bride and groom, who have barely spoken during hours of discussion about their future, exchange a look that suggests they're both relieved, excited, and slightly overwhelmed by the complexity of what they've just committed to. Their marriage will be many things: economic alliance, political partnership, social advancement. You're standing in the workshop of Mara's most renowned perfumer, where the air itself seems to shimmer with aromatic possibilities and romantic potential. This isn't just a place where people buy nice scents. It's ancient Nubia's equivalent of a love potion laboratory, where master craftsmen create olfactory magic designed to make hearts race, inhibitions disappear, and rational thought become optional. The perfumer, whose reputation extends from the cataracts of the Nile to the markets of Alexandria, is preparing a custom blend for a young woman whose wedding is approaching. But this isn't your typical bridal fragrance consultation. Every ingredient being considered has been chosen for its supposed aphrodisiac properties, its ability to enhance natural pheromones, and its power to create lasting emotional association that will bind her husband to her for life. She begins with frankincense, the golden resin that forms the base of most Nubian luxury perfumes. But this isn't ordinary frankincense. It's the rare variety that bleeds from trees growing in the sacred groves near the Temple of Amun, and it's been aged in underground chambers for 7 years, until it develops properties that supposedly make the wearer irresistible to anyone who breathes their scent. The perfumer explains that frankincense works on multiple levels. It creates an immediate sense of luxury and sophistication. It has mild psychoactive properties that induce feelings of euphoria and spiritual connection. And it contains compounds that actually do enhance the skin's natural scent in ways that trigger subconscious attraction responses. Ancient Nubian perfumers understood pheromone science centuries before anyone had words for what they were manipulating. Next comes myrrh, the darker, more complex resin that adds depth and mystery to the blend. The perfumer selects pieces that have been harvested during the full moon, because lunar timing supposedly affects the resin's potency. This might sound like ancient superstition, but modern research suggests that environmental factors during harvesting can actually influence the chemical composition of aromatic compounds. But here's where Nubian perfumery gets really sophisticated. The perfumer adds a drop of oil extracted from jasmine flowers that have been picked at dawn, when their scent is most concentrated. Jasmine contains compounds that mimic human sex hormones, and its fragrance has been scientifically proven to increase feelings of attraction and emotional bonding. The ancient Nubians didn't understand the biochemistry, but they definitely understood the results. The blend becomes more complex as she incorporates rose oil from Damascus, cinnamon bark from Ceylon, and cardamom seeds from the mountains of Ethiopia. Each ingredient has been chosen not just for its individual properties, but for how it interacts with the others to create a fragrance that evolves throughout the day, revealing different aspects of its complexity as it mingles with the wearer's natural scent. Historians still argue whether ancient perfumers actually understood the science behind their craft, or were simply following traditions that had been refined through centuries of trial and error. But the results speak for themselves. Nubian perfumes were legendary throughout the ancient world for their sophistication, longevity, and supposed magical properties. The perfumer then adds ingredients that sound more like a witch's recipe than a cosmetic formula: powdered pearls for luminosity, gold dust for prosperity, and a single drop of honey that has been blessed by temple priests. These additions might seem purely ceremonial, but they serve practical purposes too. The pearls create subtle light-reflecting particles that make the skin appear to glow. The gold adds metallic notes that complement the warm base oils, and the honey contains enzymes that help the fragrance penetrate the skin and last longer. But the most intriguing addition is something called the essence of desire, which turns out to be a carefully guarded blend of oils extracted from plants that bloom only during the brief rainy season. The perfumer won't reveal the exact composition, but she hints that it includes extracts from flowers that attract specific insects, essentially borrowing nature's own chemical communication systems to enhance human attraction. The finished perfume is applied using techniques that are part chemistry, part ritual, and part performance art. The perfumer doesn't just dab it on pulse points. She creates patterns on the skin that will release different aspects of the fragrance at different times throughout the day. A touch behind the ears for immediate impact, a brush across the collarbone for close encounters, and a subtle application to the wrists that will leave traces on everything the wearer touches. The young bride-to-be is instructed in the proper use of her custom fragrance, when to apply it for maximum effect, how to layer it with complementary scents, and which occasions call for full application versus subtle hints. This isn't just perfume. It's a complete olfactory strategy designed to create and maintain romantic attraction throughout a lifetime of marriage. As you watch the final preparations, you realize you're witnessing something that goes beyond cosmetics or even seduction. This is ancient technology for enhancing human connection, using the most primal and powerful of our senses to create bonds that transcend rational thought and social convention. The perfumer isn't just creating a pleasant scent. She's crafting a chemical key that will unlock emotional responses and create lasting memories associated with love, desire. You're witnessing a clandestine meeting in the shadow of Mara's Great Pyramid, where moonlight illuminates one of ancient Nubia's most scandalous and dangerous romantic scenarios. A love affair that crosses cultural boundaries and threatens to upend the carefully maintained social order that keeps three civilizations coexisting along the Nile. The woman approaching through the desert darkness is Nubian nobility. You can tell from the way she moves, the quality of her jewelry, and the fact that she's risking everything to be here. The man waiting for her is clearly Roman, his toga and military bearing marking him as either a diplomat or a merchant, with connections to the imperial administration. Their love affair isn't just personally risky, it's politically explosive. Cross-cultural romance in ancient Nubia was like playing chess with your life as the stakes. The Nubian kingdoms maintained complex relationships with Egypt to the north and Rome beyond that, balancing trade partnerships, military alliances, and cultural exchange while fiercely protecting their independence and identity. A romantic relationship between a Nubian aristocrat and a Roman citizen could be interpreted as anything from diplomatic breakthrough to treasonous collaboration. You watch as they embrace with the desperate intensity of people who know their time together is stolen and precious. Their conversation, conducted in a mixture of Greek, the diplomatic language of the ancient world, and broken attempts at each other's native tongues, reveals the challenges of love that transcends linguistic barriers. They're literally learning each other's languages as they fall deeper in love, creating a private vocabulary of shared words and gestures that belongs only to them. The Roman produces a gift that makes your breath catch, a small statue of Venus carved from marble quarried in distant Italy. This isn't just a romantic gesture, it's a political statement. By giving her a Roman goddess of love, he's suggesting that their relationship could bridge the gap between their cultures, that love might succeed where diplomacy has struggled. But the Nubian woman's response reveals the complexity of her position. She accepts the gift gracefully, then presents him with something equally significant, a small gold amulet bearing the image of Hathor, the Egyptian goddess of love who was also revered in Nubia. She's not rejecting his cultural offering. She's proposing a synthesis that honors both their traditions while creating something new. Historians still argue whether these cross-cultural relationships were primarily driven by genuine emotion or strategic political considerations. But watching these two navigate the dangerous waters of forbidden love, you sense that the emotions are absolutely real, even if they're complicated by larger political realities. Their conversation reveals another layer of complexity. They're not just from different cultures, but from different social classes within their respective societies. She's Nubian royalty, connected to the Candace's court, and responsible for maintaining her family's political position. He's a Roman merchant, wealthy but not aristocratic, whose success depends on maintaining good relationships with local authorities while serving imperial interests. The class differences create additional obstacles that go beyond cultural barriers. Her family expects her to marry within Nubian nobility, cementing political alliances that will strengthen the kingdom's position. His Roman associates expect him to maintain appropriate social distance from local populations, avoiding entanglements that could compromise his effectiveness as a representative of Roman interests. But then something happens that transforms their secret meeting from romantic escapade to genuine crisis. A third figure emerges from the shadows, another Nubian, this one clearly a court official whose presence here can only mean that their affair has been discovered by people with the power to destroy both their lives. The official's message is delivered with the formal courtesy that makes bad news sound even worse. The Candace is aware of their relationship and has decided that it represents an unacceptable security risk. The Roman must leave Nubian territory within 7 days, and the woman must enter into immediate marriage negotiations with a suitor chosen by the royal court. This ultimatum forces them to confront the reality that their love, however genuine, exists within political contexts that are larger and more powerful than their personal desires. They can choose love and face exile, imprisonment, or worse. Or they can choose duty and spend the rest of their lives wondering what might have been. The Roman's response surprises everyone, including his beloved. Instead of accepting defeat or proposing desperate escape plans, he makes an offer that could change everything. He's willing to renounce his Roman citizenship, convert to Nubian religious practices, and formally request permission to join her household as a dependent rather than an equal partner. This proposal is so unprecedented that even the court official looks stunned. A Roman citizen voluntarily giving up the privileges of imperial citizenship to become essentially a Nubian subject. It's either the most romantic gesture in ancient history or the most politically naive decision anyone has ever witnessed. The Nubian woman's response will determine whether this becomes a legendary love story that transcends cultural boundaries, or a caution. You're standing on the banks of the Nile as the annual flood begins to recede, marking the beginning of ancient Nubia's most romantic season. This isn't coincidence. It's the result of thousands of years of cultural evolution that synchronized human courtship with the natural rhythms that governed life, death, and prosperity along the world's longest river. The flooding season, called enchant, was when the Nile transformed from a manageable waterway into a vast inland sea that covered the fertile plains and forced communities to retreat to higher ground. During these months, normal social activities were suspended. Families lived in closer quarters than usual, and young people had unprecedented opportunities to interact without the usual supervision and social constraints. You watch as families emerge from their flood season shelters, blinking in the bright sunlight, and immediately beginning the complex social rituals that mark the transition from survival mode to prosperity season. The first priority is assessing which young people have reached marriageable age during the months of enforced proximity, and which existing relationships have deepened into something worth formalizing. The receding waters reveal more than just fertile mud ready for planting. They expose a social landscape that has been transformed by months of intimate community living. Couples who barely knew each other before the flood have had time to discover compatibility or incompatibility. Families have had opportunities to observe potential matches in the kind of close quarters that reveal true character. And young people have had chances to demonstrate their value as partners through their behavior during the challenging flood months. But here's where Nubian seasonal courtship gets really sophisticated. The post-flood period isn't just about making romantic connections. It's about timing those connections to align with agricultural and economic cycles that will determine the success of any resulting marriages. Couples who commit to each other during the planting season can expect to harvest their first crops as married partners, creating immediate economic stability for their new households. The timing also affects the social calendar in ways that maximize romantic opportunities. The months following the flood are when communities celebrate their survival with festivals, religious ceremonies, and communal work projects that bring young people together in contexts that encourage both cooperation and competition. It's like having a 4-month-long series of speed dating events, except the stakes are lifetime partnerships and family alliances. You notice how different age groups participate in seasonal courtship according to carefully observed social protocols. Teenagers who are approaching marriageable age are allowed to participate in group activities, but are closely supervised by older relatives. Young adults who are actively seeking partners have more freedom, but are expected to conduct themselves according to strict codes of behavior that demonstrate their readiness for adult responsibilities. Historians still argue whether these seasonal patterns were consciously designed social institutions or natural adaptations to environmental conditions, but the evidence suggests they were probably both. The flooding cycle created practical constraints that shaped social behavior, but communities also developed elaborate cultural traditions that maximize the romantic and social opportunities created by those constraints. The seasonal approach to courtship also created natural rhythms for relationship development that modern dating could learn from. The flood season provided time for couples to get to know each other in low-pressure environments. The planting season offered opportunities to work together on practical projects that revealed compatibility and shared values. The growing season allowed relationships to develop gradually, while both partners focused on productive activities. And the harvest season provided natural occasions for celebration and formal commitment. But the most fascinating aspect of seasonal courtship is how it integrated individual romantic desires with community needs and environmental realities. Young people weren't just choosing personal partners. They were participating in a complex social system that ensured genetic diversity, economic stability, and cultural continuity across generations. The post-flood courtship season reaches its peak during the Festival of the New Year, when communities celebrate the successful completion of another flood cycle and the beginning of a new agricultural year. This is when most marriage proposals are made, engagement ceremonies are held, and wedding dates are set for the coming year. You watch as a young couple approaches the festival altar carrying offerings that symbolize their hopes for their future together. Grain for prosperity, flowers for beauty, and small carved figures representing the children they hope to have. Their families surround them with expressions of approval and support, because their relationship has been observed and evaluated throughout the seasonal cycle and found worthy of community endorsement. The priest who accepts their offerings speaks words that have been refined over centuries of seasonal celebrations. As the Nile rises and falls in its eternal cycle, so may your love deepen and renew itself through all the seasons of your lives together. As the flood brings fertility to the land, so may your union bring prosperity to your families and strength to your community. This isn't just a romantic blessing. It's a recognition that successful marriages are part of the larger ecological and social systems that sustain human communities along the Nile. The seasonal timing, the community involvement, and the integration of personal desires with practical considerations all work together to create conditions where love can flourish within sustainable social structures. As the festival continues into the night, you're observing something that would make modern feminists either cheer or scratch their heads in confusion. A Nubian courtship ritual where the woman is not only allowed, but expected to take the initiative in romantic pursuits, while the man's role is to respond gracefully to her advances and prove himself worthy of her attention. The scene unfolding before you challenges everything you might assume about ancient gender roles. A young Nubian woman of noble birth is approaching a man she's chosen as a potential partner, and she's doing it with the confidence of someone who knows that cultural tradition supports her right to make the first move. This isn't rebellion against social norms, it's the social norm. She begins her approach with a gesture that would be considered scandalously forward in most ancient cultures. She removes one of her gold bracelets and places it on his wrist without asking permission. In Nubian society, this is equivalent to a marriage proposal, and it puts the man in the position of having to decide whether to accept her offer or find a diplomatically graceful way to decline. The man's response reveals just how different Nubian gender dynamics were from their neighbors. Instead of being offended by her boldness or automatically assuming dominance in the relationship, he examines the bracelet carefully, considering not just his attraction to her, but his ability to match her social status, economic resources, and intellectual capabilities. He's being evaluated, and he knows it. This reversal of typical ancient gender roles wasn't just romantic theater. It reflected deeper aspects of Nubian society where women, especially royal women, wielded real political and economic power. The Kandakes who ruled Nubian kingdoms were not just ceremonial figures, but actual military commanders and diplomatic leaders who negotiated with Rome and Egypt as equals. In a society where women could be pharaohs, it made sense that they could also be romantic initiators. You watch as the woman begins what can only be described as a courtship performance designed to demonstrate her qualifications as a partner. She recites poetry that showcases her education, discusses trade routes that reveal her knowledge of economics, and makes observations about military strategy that prove her understanding of politics. She's not trying to be attractive, she's trying to be impressive. The man responds by demonstrating his own qualifications, but in ways that complement rather than compete with her strengths. When she mentions trade routes, he discusses agricultural production that could supply those routes. When she analyzes military strategy, he talks about diplomatic solutions that could avoid military conflicts. He's positioning himself as a valuable partner rather than a dominant leader. Historians still argue whether these gender role reversals were unique to Nubian culture or existed in other ancient African societies that have been less thoroughly documented. But the evidence from Nubian art, literature, and historical records suggests that women's romantic agency was not only accepted, but celebrated as a sign of cultural sophistication. The courtship continues with the woman proposing a series of challenges that will test the man's suitability as a partner. These aren't physical contests designed to prove masculine dominance, but intellectual and artistic challenges that reveal character, creativity, and cultural knowledge. She wants to know if he can compose poetry, solve mathematical problems, and engage in philosophical discussions that will keep her interested for the next several decades. But here's where Nubian gender dynamics get really sophisticated. The woman's romantic agency doesn't mean the man becomes passive or submissive. Instead, both partners are expected to demonstrate active engagement, intellectual equality, and mutual respect. The goal isn't for one person to dominate the other, but for both to prove they can contribute to a partnership that benefits both individuals and their broader community. The man's response to her challenges reveals that he understands the cultural expectations perfectly. He doesn't try to deflect her tests or assert traditional masculine authority. Instead, he engages with her intellectual challenges while proposing some of his own, essentially saying, "I respect your right to evaluate me, and I'd like the same opportunity to evaluate you." This creates a courtship dynamic that's more like a sophisticated job interview than a traditional romantic pursuit, except both parties are simultaneously interviewing and being interviewed for the position of life partner. It's remarkably modern in its emphasis on mutual evaluation and compatibility assessment. The woman's final test is perhaps the most revealing. She asks the man to describe his vision for their potential marriage, including how household decisions would be made, how resources would be managed, and how conflicts would be resolved. She's essentially asking him to articulate his understanding of partnership in ways that will reveal whether he sees marriage as collaboration or conquest. His response demonstrates the sophistication of Nubian relationship models. He proposes a system where major decisions are made jointly, where both partners maintain individual interests and responsibilities, and where conflicts are resolved through discussion rather than dominance. He's describing a marriage model that wouldn't seem out of place in modern relationship counseling. The woman's acceptance of his proposal, signaled by placing a second bracelet on his other wrist, creates a partnership that's been negotiated rather than assumed, where both parties have actively chosen each other based on demonstrated compatibility and mutual respect. It's a remarkably enlightened approach to romantic relationships that challenges assumptions about ancient gender roles and offers insights that remain relevant thousands of years later. You're sitting in a circle of flickering oil lamps as the village elders prepare to initiate a group of young Nubians into the mysteries of adult romance. This isn't your typical coming-of-age ceremony. It's an elaborate educational program where teenagers learn the sophisticated art of flirtation, courtship, and relationship management that will determine their success in love and marriage for the rest of their lives. The eldest woman in the village, whose wrinkled hands have guided countless couples through the complexities of Nubian romance, begins with a lesson that would make modern dating coaches take notes. Love without strategy is like farming without understanding the seasons. It might work by accident, but it will probably end in disaster. The young people gathered around her represent the next generation of Nubian society, and their romantic education is considered as important as their training in agriculture, crafts, or military skills. These aren't casual conversations about the birds and the bees. These are intensive workshops in the cultural codes, social expectations, and practical techniques that govern successful relationships in ancient Nubian society. The first lesson focuses on what the elders call the language of glances, a complex system of eye contact that allows young people to communicate romantic interest, availability, and intentions without speaking a word. The instructor demonstrates how a direct gaze held for exactly 3 heartbeats indicates serious interest, while a glance that slides away after 2 heartbeats suggests playful flirtation without commitment. But this isn't just about batting eyelashes and looking mysterious. The young people are learning a sophisticated nonverbal communication system that includes subtle head tilts, specific hand gestures, and even the way someone positions their body in relation to others. A shoulder turned slightly towards someone indicates openness to conversation. Arms crossed while maintaining eye contact suggests interest but caution. The positioning of feet reveals whether someone is planning to stay in a conversation or looking for an excuse to leave. The teenagers practice these techniques with the seriousness of students learning essential life skills, because that's exactly what they are. In a society where marriages are often arranged through family negotiations, the ability to communicate romantic preferences subtly but clearly could mean the difference between a happy partnership and a lifetime of misery. Historians still argue whether these formal courtship education programs were unique to Nubian culture or existed in other ancient societies that have been less thoroughly documented. But the evidence suggests that Nubians took romantic education more seriously than most of their contemporaries. The second lesson covers what modern people might call emotional intelligence, the ability to read other people's feelings, respond appropriately to different emotional states, and manage one's own emotions in ways that enhance rather than damage relationships. The elder explains that successful courtship requires understanding not just what someone says, but what they mean, what they need, and what they fear. The young people learn to recognize signs of genuine interest versus polite social interaction, to distinguish between temporary attraction and lasting compatibility, and to identify the difference between someone who's ready for serious commitment and someone who's just enjoying the attention. These are sophisticated psychological skills that many modern adults never master. But the most fascinating part of the lesson involves learning to manage their own emotional responses in ways that serve their long-term romantic goals. The elder teaches them techniques for staying calm during intense conversations, for expressing disagreement without creating conflict, and for maintaining their own emotional stability while supporting a partner through difficult times. The third lesson focuses on the practical aspects of courtship that go beyond romance. How to evaluate a potential partner's character, how to assess compatibility in areas like work ethic and family values, and how to have conversations about expectations and goals that will prevent future conflicts. This is relationship counseling disguised as courtship education. The young people learn to ask questions that reveal important information about potential partners. How do you handle disagreements with your family? Reveals conflict resolution skills. What do you hope to accomplish in the next 5 years? Shows ambition and planning ability. How do you treat people who can't help you? Indicates character and values. The final lesson of the evening covers something that would make modern relationship experts applaud: the importance of maintaining individual identity within romantic partnerships. The elder explains that the strongest marriages are between 2 complete people who choose to share their lives, not between 2 incomplete people who hope to find wholeness through their partner. The young people are taught to develop their own interests, skills, and friendships that will make them interesting partners, and provide emotional resources they can draw on throughout their marriages. They learn that being a good partner requires first being a complete person, and that the best relationships enhance rather than replace individual identity. As the formal instruction ends, the elder offers a final piece of wisdom that summarizes the entire evening's lessons. Remember that courtship is not about convincing someone to love you. It's about discovering whether you can love each other well enough to build a life together that serves both your individual dreams and your shared hopes. The young people disperse into the night carrying with them not just romantic techniques, but a comprehensive education in the emotional, social, and practical skills that will determine their success in love and marriage. They've been given tools that go far beyond flirtation. They've been prepared for the complex realities of adult relationships in ways that honor both individual agency and community values. You realize you've witnessed something remarkable. A society that takes romantic education seriously enough to provide. You're hiding behind a date palm as one of ancient Nubia's most dramatic love triangles reaches its explosive climax, where jealousy, betrayal, and wounded pride are about to collide in ways that will either destroy 3 lives or teach everyone involved some very expensive lessons about the dangers of playing with other people's hearts. The woman at the center of this romantic catastrophe is Ammonitor, a merchant's daughter whose beauty and intelligence have attracted the attention of 2 very different suitors. The first is Kaliut, a wealthy goldsmith whose family controls several mines in the southern provinces. The second is Arikamani, a young military officer whose courage in recent border conflicts has earned him recognition from the Kandake herself. Both men believe they have exclusive claims to her affections, and both are about to discover they've been catastrophically wrong. The drama began 3 months ago when Ammonitor, frustrated by her family's pressure to choose between equally attractive suitors, decided to play a dangerous game. Instead of making a decision, she began encouraging both men simultaneously, accepting gifts from each while making promises to neither. This strategy might have worked if she hadn't underestimated how seriously Nubian men took romantic commitments and how quickly news travels in a close-knit community. The first crack in her deception appeared when Kaliut commissioned a special piece of jewelry for her, a gold collar inlaid with precious stones that would have marked her as his intended bride. When he presented it to her at a public festival, she accepted it graciously, not realizing that everyone who witnessed the exchange would interpret it as a formal engagement announcement. But Arikamani had been planning his own grand gesture for the same festival. He arrived with a captured leopard that he intended to present to her family as a symbol of his prowess and devotion, only to find her wearing another man's engagement jewelry and accepting congratulations on her upcoming marriage to someone else. The confrontation that followed was the kind of public spectacle that ancient Nubians would talk about for generations. Arikamani didn't challenge Kaliut directly. That would have been socially inappropriate and potentially dangerous. Instead, he made a formal speech praising Ammonitor's beauty and wisdom, while questioning whether any man who truly loved her would try to claim her before she had freely chosen her own path. This was a masterful piece of public rhetoric that simultaneously honored Ammonitor's agency, criticized Kaliut's presumption, and positioned Arikamani as the more respectful suitor. The crowd's response made it clear that public opinion was shifting in his favor, which only made the situation more volatile. Historians still argue whether love triangles like this were common in ancient Nubian society, or whether this particular case became legendary precisely because it was so unusual. But the evidence suggests that romantic competition was taken very seriously and could have significant social and economic consequences for everyone involved. Kaliut's response revealed both his desperation and his fundamental misunderstanding of Nubian courtship culture. Instead of gracefully accepting the possibility that Ammonitor might prefer another suitor, he began spreading rumors about Arikamani's financial prospects, his family's political connections, and his ability to provide for a wife in the style that a merchant's daughter deserved. This backfired spectacularly. Nubian society valued honor and direct communication, and Kaliut's gossip campaign was seen as cowardly and dishonorable. Worse, his attacks on Aricamani's character reflected poorly on his own judgment and emotional stability. People began questioning whether someone who responded to romantic competition with underhanded tactics would make a reliable husband. Meanwhile, Amenitter was discovering that playing two suitors against each other had consequences she hadn't anticipated. Her reputation for honesty and straightforward dealing was being questioned by people who had observed her contradictory behavior. Families who had been considering her as a potential daughter-in-law were having second thoughts about her character and judgment. The crisis reached its peak when both men appeared at her family's compound on the same evening, each believing he had been invited for a private conversation about marriage arrangements. The resulting confrontation was witnessed by half the neighborhood and became the subject of songs, stories, and cautionary tales that would be repeated for decades. Aricamani handled the situation with the diplomatic skills that had made him successful in military negotiations. He acknowledged Kaliut's prior claim, praised Amenitter's right to choose her own path, and offered to withdraw from the competition if she clearly preferred his rival. This gracious response enhanced his reputation while putting pressure on both Amenitter and Kaliut to respond with equal honor. Kaliut, unfortunately, chose a different approach. He demanded that Amenitter make an immediate decision, threatened to withdraw his marriage offer if she continued to hesitate, and made several comments about women who couldn't appreciate the value of what they were being offered. This display of possessiveness and disrespect sealed his fate in a culture that valued women's agency and decision-making authority. Amenitter's final choice surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of selecting either suitor, she announced that she needed time to reflect on her own behavior and priorities before making any commitments to anyone. She returned Kaliut's jewelry, thanked Aricamani for his patience and respect, and declared that she would not consider marriage proposals for at least a year while she focused on developing her own character and judgment. This decision transformed a scandalous love triangle into a story about personal growth, moral courage, and the importance of self-knowledge in romantic relationships. Amenitter's willingness to admit her mistakes and take responsibility for the chaos she had created earned her community respect and gave her the time she needed to mature into someone capable of making wise choices about love and marriage. The aftermath of this romantic drama provided lessons that would influence Nubian courtship culture for generations. The importance of honest communication, the dangers of playing games with people's emotions, and the value of choosing character over charm in potential partners. You're crouched in the shadows of a moonlit temple courtyard, watching as a desperate young woman performs rituals that blur the line between religion and magic, between prayer and manipulation, between hope and obsession. This is ancient Nubia's dark side of romance, where love potions, binding spells, and supernatural interventions promise to solve problems that probably shouldn't be solved through mystical means. The woman kneeling before the altar of Hathor is Kandeg, a farmer's daughter whose name ironically echoes the royal title she'll never hold. She's been in love with a Menketi, the son of a wealthy merchant family, for 2 years, but he barely acknowledges her existence. Tonight, she's attempting something that could either win his heart or destroy both their lives. A love spell that supposedly guarantees romantic success, but comes with consequences that most people prefer not to think about too carefully. The ritual she's performing has been passed down through generations of Nubian women who refused to accept that love couldn't be controlled, manipulated, or commanded through the proper application of supernatural techniques. The ingredients spread before her read like a recipe for either romance or disaster. Hair from the beloved stolen from his barber, blood from her own finger freely given, honey blessed by temple priests expensive but legitimate, and something called the tears of Isis. That's probably just salt water but costs more than most people's monthly income. She begins by creating a small clay figure that's supposed to represent a Menketti, molding it with the kind of focused intensity that suggests she's done this before or at least thought about it obsessively. The figure is crude but recognizable, and she whispers his name over it repeatedly while incorporating the stolen hair into the clay. This isn't just craft work. It's sympathetic magic based on the belief that controlling a representation of someone gives you power over the actual person. The next phase of the ritual involves writing his name and hers on a piece of papyrus, using ink mixed with her blood, then burning the papyrus while reciting incantations that are supposed to bind their destinies together. The words she's chanting are in an ancient dialect that predates formal Nubian religion, suggesting these practices are older and more primitive than the sophisticated theological systems that govern official temple worship. Historians still argue whether love magic was widely practiced in ancient Nubian society, or whether it existed primarily on the margins as a desperate resort for people whose romantic lives had gone seriously wrong. But the archaeological evidence suggests that magical practices were more common than official religious authorities would have preferred to admit. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Candace isn't just performing a simple love spell. She's attempting something called the binding of hearts, which is supposed to make the target incapable of loving anyone except the spellcaster. This isn't about inspiring genuine affection. It's about creating magical compulsion that overrides free will and natural attraction. The ethical implications are disturbing even by ancient standards. The ritual requires her to bury the clay figure at a crossroads while the moon is full, then return to the same spot for 7 consecutive nights to perform additional incantations. Each night the spell supposedly grows stronger, but so do the potential consequences if something goes wrong. Love magic that backfires doesn't just fail. It can allegedly cause the opposite of the intended effect, creating hatred, obsession, or supernatural punishment that affects entire families. As she prepares to leave the temple with her magical materials, Candace encounters someone who changes everything. An elderly priestess who has been watching from the shadows and decides to intervene before the young woman makes a mistake that could ruin multiple lives. The priestess doesn't condemn Candace's desperation or mock her belief in magical solutions. Instead, she offers something more valuable than any love spell: wisdom about the nature of genuine attraction and the difference between love and obsession. She explains that magic designed to override someone's free will inevitably create relationships based on compulsion rather than genuine affection, and that such relationships bring misery to everyone involved. But the priestess also offers practical alternatives to magical manipulation. She suggests ways that Candace could legitimately attract a Menketti's attention, developing skills that would make her more interesting, finding opportunities to demonstrate her character and intelligence, and creating situations where they could interact naturally without supernatural coercion. The conversation that follows reveals the real tragedy behind most love magic. It's usually attempted by people who have convinced themselves that they're not worthy of genuine love, and that supernatural intervention is their only hope for romantic happiness. The priestess helps Candace understand that her desperation to control a Menketti's feelings reflects her own lack of self-confidence and her belief that she couldn't attract him through her own merits. The climax of this midnight encounter comes when the priestess offers to teach Candace a different kind of magic, The art of becoming genuinely attractive through personal development, emotional maturity, and authentic self-expression. This magic doesn't guarantee specific romantic outcomes, but it creates the conditions where genuine love can flourish naturally. Candake faces a choice that will determine not just her romantic future, but her character development. She can proceed with the binding spell and risk the consequences of trying to control another person's emotions. Or she can destroy her magical materials and commit to the more difficult but ultimately more rewarding path of earning love through becoming worthy of it. Her decision, made in the flickering light of temple torches, while the goddess Hathor watches from her carved throne, will echo through both their lives and serve as either a cautionary tale about the dangers of magical shortcuts or an inspiring story about choosing. You're standing at the edge of time itself, watching as the golden age of Nubian romance slowly transforms into something new, carrying its ancient wisdom forward through the centuries like seeds scattered by desert winds that will take root in distant lands and future hearts. The great kingdoms of Kush are fading, but their understanding of love, attraction, and human connection is spreading along trade routes that stretch from the heart of Africa to the shores of the Mediterranean and beyond. The last of the great Candake sits in her palace at Meroe, surrounded by scrolls and tablets that contain the accumulated romantic wisdom of her civilization. She's not just a queen, she's a curator of cultural knowledge who understands that empires may fall, but the insights they've developed about human nature can survive to influence countless future generations. The love letters, courtship rituals, and relationship practices that you've witnessed are being preserved, adapted, and transmitted to cultures that will carry them forward into an uncertain future. The merchants who once brought silk and spices to Nubian markets are now carrying something more precious. Stories about a civilization where women could initiate romance, where courtship was treated as high art, where seasonal rhythms guided relationship timing, and where love was understood as both personal emotion and social responsibility. These stories will influence romantic practices in Egypt, Ethiopia, Rome, and eventually reach cultures that haven't even been imagined yet. You watch as a young Nubian scholar carefully copies ancient texts about love magic and courtship rituals, not because he believes in their supernatural power, but because he recognizes their psychological sophistication and their insights into human motivation. These documents will survive the fall of kingdoms and the rise of new religions, preserving wisdom about attraction, compatibility, and relationship dynamics that remains relevant across millennia. The temple practices that once brought young people together under divine auspices are evolving into new forms of community-supported courtship that will influence how future societies think about the relationship between individual romantic choice and collective social responsibility. The idea that love should serve both personal happiness and community stability will echo through countless cultures that have never heard of ancient Nubia, but will benefit from its insights. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Nubian romance culture is its sophisticated understanding of gender dynamics and mutual respect in relationships. The practices you've observed, where women could initiate courtship, where both partners were expected to demonstrate worthiness, where marriage was viewed as partnership rather than ownership, will influence societies that are still centuries away from discovering these principles through their own social evolution. The cross-cultural relationships that once scandalized conservative Nubians are becoming the foundation for new forms of cultural synthesis that will enrich the entire ancient world. The Roman merchants, Egyptian diplomats, and Ethiopian traders who fell in love with Nubian partners are carrying home not just spouses, but entire systems of thinking about romance, marriage, and family life that will gradually transform their own societies. Historians still argue about the specific mechanisms through which Nubian romantic practices influenced later cultures, but the evidence suggests that their impact was both profound and lasting, creating ripple effects that can be traced through the development of romantic literature, courtship customs, and relationship ideals across multiple civilizations. The seasonal approach to courtship that once synchronized Nubian romance with the rhythms of the Nile is being adapted by agricultural societies throughout Africa and the Mediterranean, creating new traditions that honor both natural cycles and human emotional needs. The idea that timing matters in love, that there are seasons for meeting, seasons for courtship, seasons for commitment, and seasons for renewal, will influence how people think about relationships for thousands of years. The educational programs that once taught young Nubians the sophisticated arts of flirtation and relationship management are evolving into new forms of wisdom transmission that will help future generations navigate the eternal challenges of love, attraction, and compatibility. The recognition that romantic success requires specific skills that can be taught and learned will eventually influence everything from medieval courtly love traditions to modern relationship counseling. As the sun sets over the ancient pyramids of Meroe for perhaps the last time in their golden age, you realize that you've witnessed something extraordinary. A civilization that understood love not as a mysterious force beyond human comprehension, but as a complex interaction of psychology, sociology, economics, and spirituality that could be studied, refined, and improved through conscious effort and cultural wisdom. The young couples who once danced to Nubian rhythms in torchlit courtyards are now grandparents telling stories to children who will carry those stories to lands their ancestors never imagined. The perfumes that once made hearts race in ancient markets are being recreated by craftsmen who understand that scent is a language of attraction that transcends cultural boundaries. The marriage negotiation techniques that once balanced individual desires with family needs are being adapted by societies that are just beginning to grapple with the complex relationship between personal choice and social responsibility. And somewhere in the desert night, as the last echoes of ancient laughter fade into the eternal silence of shifting sands, the wisdom of Nubian romance continues its journey through time, carrying with it the understanding that love, at its best, is both the most personal of human experiences and the most universal of human needs, requiring both individual courage and collective wisdom to flourish in ways that honor both the heart's deepest longings and the community's highest aspirations. The legacy lives on, whispered in the wind, written in the stars, and carried in the hearts of everyone who has ever believed that love, properly understood and skillfully practiced, can transform not just individual lives but entire civilizations, creating ripples of wisdom that spread across centuries like the eternal flooding of the Nile, bringing fertility